Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We're getting ready to break down the DraftKings slate for Friday, January 3rd. I'm skipping way ahead in months, I guess. Hopefully you
February,
had
huh?
Yeah, I know. I don't want to get there that quickly. Good thing it's only January yet. But hopefully you had some success yesterday. Taylor's projections definitely hit on a lot of plays. There were a lot of guys that we liked that definitely smashed. You just had to get a little bit different. Kind of like what you were saying. You're saying go get LeBron and Reeves in the last game and eat some of this chalk and just find a couple ways to get different. You certainly did that. You had Steph Curry in a couple lineups, ended up having a decent night. So hopefully everybody watching found a path to a similar result. If not, let's do it tonight. The way we do this is we go position by position, highlighting our favorite plays and kind of just digging into the nuance of it, looking at projections, matchups, and ownership. And we are using Taylor's projections. And by the way, there is a bit of a difference. Obviously, whatever projection platform you use is going to be a little bit different. But I mean, Goga Batadze is probably the one that stands out the most to me. Where's a 5-point projection difference between yours and what I'm seeing elsewhere? So that is pretty interesting. That said, if you like free advice and you like breakdowns like this, smash that like button to help us out and also subscribe to the channel so you get alerted to future videos just like this. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's go position by position, starting at point guard. Up top, we have Cade Cunningham and SGA and LaMelo Ball all coming in with a 52-plus point fantasy projection. Cade Cunningham has the best. He looks like the best play overall up top at 9.9K going against the Hornets, but he's also going to be super owned. So looking at those three guys first, which one is your priority tonight?
Still Cade. No Ivy, no Fontecchio. Ivy's the big one, obviously. His assist rate's like 49%, and his usage is like 34% without Ivy.
Seems
And they're
good.
playing Charlotte, and he's under 10K. Like, he's a walking triple-double. I think it's a very obvious and very easy play. I'm not concerned about the ownership. Like, it doesn't really matter. I just think he's a fantastic play. All of them are, though. Like, LaMelo's questionable, but if he's in, he's under 10K. He's got a monster role. I don't really think he'll be limited. I missed a few games, but still looks good. Cade's certainly better, but LaMelo is not going to be owned. I think the Q tag is going to bring his ownership down. Detroit's not a very imposing matchup either. So happy to get to both. And I think playing them both in the same lineup, if you have enough value to do so, is pretty interesting for a little game stack.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I do think I'm kind of out on SGA on this slate just because if I'm going to pay up to almost 11K, I think I would just keep going with Jokic or Wemby. SGA is a fine play. Knicks do not defend out on the perimeter as well as they have in years past. So I think, people get scared of the Knicks a little bit, but I just don't think you really need to be. That said, you have Cade there. Cade is the obvious play if you're going to spend almost 10K at point guard. Going down, there are some guys that are actually worth looking at if you don't want to eat the chalk with Cade and you're not really feeling SGA's price and you're not really feeling LaMelo coming back from injury. The first one that pops off is going to be DeJounte Murray coming in with a really nice 47-point fantasy projection in the best possible spot against the Wizards. I like him quite a bit. I do not mind getting away from Cade because of his presence. And if I do fade Cade, I think that's the first guy I'm going to. How do you feel about DeJounte? And then also let's touch on Jalen Suggs, who is $400 cheaper, has only a projection down by 4 points from DeJounte, and has a nice matchup against the Raptors.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of Suggs, which is not something I really have been. And now we're getting him at
8.3K
K3, but
I'm sure that feels really good.
He's been at like 1.3 points per minute over the last few years without both Wagner's, without Banchero in there. He just has a very steady role, and the matchup's a great one, and the point spread in that game is like 1. So I think he's a perfectly fine play, even if the price tag's a bit uncomfortable. I do think DeJounte is good. He's also a bit expensive, and he's not really been very good all season, but it's the Wizards. You can play anyone against the Wizards. He's a very good per minute performer still. So no qualms with that. CJ is a similar play. I see CJ projecting for a decent amount of ownership, which I'm not getting to. I'll be under the field on him, I think, but I don't think he's a terrible play either. I just wouldn't play him together.
Yeah, I never feel good about Suggs, but the matchup is there. The projection is good. The usage is good. So I don't hate it. But if I'm going to spend 8.3, I would just rather go up and get DeJounte Murray. Murray has been certainly inconsistent. 24 fantasy points last time, 49 the game before that. But he does have a ceiling, 64 fantasy points 5 games ago against the Nuggets. So I'm pretty comfortable playing DeJounte if I'm not playing Cade. And maybe even just rolling with those two guys as my top 2 studs of the slate. Don't think it's the worst thing to do. I do feel like it's a Jokic slate personally, but I don't hate that idea. And I think dollar for dollar, DeJounte does stand out a little bit, especially since he's going to be a little bit less on than Cade. It might be a little bit easier to get to. Because of these guys, I just don't feel the need to pay 9.8K for Scotty Barnes. I don't feel the need to pay for Kyrie Irving, who is just kind of erratic in this non-Luka role. Like, obviously he has a ceiling without Luka, but it's touch and go for sure.
Playing
So
Cleveland,
don't think,
like it's a pretty
I
horrible
know.
spot, so I'm not really interested either.
Exactly. And he's not going to carry ownership, so I guess you could argue that for tournaments, but I just don't see the point. Like, if you want to pay up, there's Cade, there's LaMelo, there's DeJounte. If you want to pay down, there's other options for that too. And then speaking of which, if we want to dive into the mid-range, you can always look at Spida at 8.4K, but I don't think I need to do that when there's Jordan Poole at 8.2, CJ McCollum at 7.5. Jamal Murray's been cooking, and he's only 7.9K. I think of the lot of those guys, I think it's going to be McCollum for me. I know, like you mentioned, he is carrying some ownership, but a 7.5K against the Wizards with an expanded role with no Ingram or Zion, I don't hate that. I think he's obviously a better play in a vacuum compared to DeJounte just because he's way cheaper, but both of them are in play. Both of them look pretty darn good. And again, Brunson 8.9K against OKC. Why am I doing that? I don't want to do that. It just seems so unnecessary. So
Q tag also.
Exactly. So obviously, by the way, if he's out, just be careful because the other night Miles McBride looked like a smash play and he didn't even play. It was Cam Payne who ended up coming in for Brunson. So just gotta keep an eye on those starting lineups sometimes.
He was hurt.
No, I know, but I'm just saying it was. I think they made it fairly unclear as to if.
I think it was a late scratch after lock.
I know he didn't start though, so you're right. Like we should have been a little bit wary of the situation right away.
He was announced as the starter, and then they ruled him out after lock, so everyone got fucked.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what happened. All right, well, there's not much you can do about that actually, but just keep an eye on it if we can. Working our way down, there is some value here. Stephon Castle, 3.4K. I like the minutes and the projection. Obviously, he's been pretty unsteady, like pretty unstable, but the price is really nice. There's another value.
Sohan is going to see more minutes. Like he's projected for more minutes because Sohan is not playing. So his role should be expanded. He's super cheap. He's 3.4. So like I'm not super excited about playing Stephon Castle and half the field is going to play him, but he's so cheap that it's kind of hard to get away from it. I don't think it's a bad play at all.
No, I don't mind it.
Going back to the mid-range, Jordan Poole is projecting for like no ownership. The matchup against New Orleans is one. Pelicans good on that game. There's no Bilal Coulibaly for Washington. He came back from a hip injury and played 27 minutes. I think 30 plus is reasonable for Poole. He's expensive, but he's also been amazing this season. I think there's payout potential with Poole at like 0 ownership also.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned him. I didn't really elaborate, but I do like Poole. I like the idea of stacking that game naturally. Why would you not want to have interest in stacking the Pelicans and the Wizards, two teams that do not defend and like to play pretty fast? So, I mean, that game has a 232 total. Weird that the Pels are 8-point favorites. I guess the Wizards are that bad, but it's not like the Pels are the world beaters or anything. But yeah, I like living in that range. I would not be totally opposed to getting DeJounte, CJ, and Poole in the same lineup. You would have to obviously sacrifice major upside with like Cade or one of the elite bigs that we're going to be touching on later. But I don't hate it. I think that is a very, very stackable game. There's not a lot of other value way down low. I guess we can keep an eye on the Knicks situation. Miles McBride or Cam Payne could end up being viable. But right now, Stephon Castle, he's going to come in with ownership because he's kind of the only real punt at point guard that we're looking at currently.
Yeah. Like I said, I have no issue with it. There is a lot of mid-range stuff, though, like actual mid-range. Russ in a starting role, getting more expensive, but decent run back if you're playing a lot of Spurs on the other side. Chris Paul in that same game looks pretty good at 6'3". Don't hate Brogdon without Bilal Coulibaly, 6K flat. The minutes have been coming up for him. I think another value worth a shot is Bub at 4.8. Like, no Coulibaly, minutes have been up for him. He's just cheap and not really projected to be all that popular. But again, like the Pelicans aren't a good defensive team. I feel like the Wizards should be a little bit more popular than they are. So I think Carrington is pretty interesting at sub 5K.
Yeah, I was going to say, for those who don't know who Bub is, that's Carrington for the Wizards, the rookie. I think of the guys you just mentioned, he probably stands out the most because it's only 4.8K and there's just extra usage to go around with no Koulibaly. So I like that call out quite a bit. And honestly, he's not costing you anything. It's low risk and it's a really good matchup and good game environment. So you can just slide into your lineup at 4.8K. I still think Stefan Castle is kind of necessary as things stand. We'll see what else opens up.
I think you can also pivot in a large field set to Ty Jerome at 3-2. No Sam Merrill, no Isaac Okoro. Ty Jerome is a really good per minute producer, just super cheap. I think it doesn't take much for him to pay off that price tag, and he's just a straight line pivot from Castle that's going to be owned like not at all. So I don't think that's a horrible play either.
Yeah, I probably won't be joining you there, but I do see the logic with a couple guys out for them for sure.
And then quickly, another guy worth a shout just because like no RJ Barrett. 32 minutes in his first game back, he went completely insane. The matchup against Orlando is brutal, but quickly you can argue he's a little underpriced for the role he's going to play.
He's absolutely underpriced. I'm assuming just it's baked in. The bad matchup with Orlando is baked into that price. I don't think we have to worry about the minutes at all. Like you said, he played 32 in his first game back, went bananas. So if you like Suggs and maybe Goga too, because Goga looks awesome tonight. So if you're playing one or two Magic, why wouldn't you consider running it back with the Raptor or two, right? So not that you want to stack a Magic game, but yeah, 6.9K manual quickly, 100%. I only didn't mention it because I hate targeting guys against the Magic. It almost never works out. But as far as value in point per dollar in ceiling goes, like he does look awesome at that price tag with no RJ Barrett or no, Scotty Barnes is in, but no RJ Barrett. That's significant. All right, so shooting guard is less exciting. Jalen Suggs, you can use him there. He is the top projecting shooting guard with 43 fantasy points. Right behind him, you save $1,000 and get Trey Murphy, who has a similar projection. I think he is the better play between the two. I don't think it takes a lot to see that. Probably one reason why I'm not really getting into a lot of Suggs, just because when you look at these guys like McCollum over DeJounte, Murphy over Suggs, it just seems a little obvious. And then Jaylen Brown, 8.8K. He's questionable again. Obviously, keep an eye on his status. He's fine, but I don't think we need to use him here. I'd rather just play Suggs or Trey Murphy. Again, same thing with Kyrie Irving. You mentioned Poole. We mentioned McCollum. I think those guys are really good plays. I think Murphy and Suggs just pop a little bit more. But all these guys are in play. 6.2K Vassell with no Sohan is pretty interesting. He remains fairly steady. He's been pretty decent lately, picking it up a little bit. Don't think I'm going to do 8.6K Brandon Miller, even though the Pistons are a good matchup. Derek White, 7.1K. If no Jaylen Brown, that's totally fine. Don't have a problem with that, but he doesn't project amazingly. That's probably it as far as expensive guys at shooting guard. I think Trey Murphy is my favorite play here, though.
Murphy just looks insanely good. Like I'm kind of worried that I have him over projected, but the role he's playing like 40 minutes a game. The Wizards are the Wizards. Like you want as many guys against Washington as you can get, essentially. So he's easily the best play from the Pelicans. Like I know we mentioned those guards, but I much prefer Murphy with his guard forward eligibility. So just an amazing play. Vassell also guard forward, like you said, no Son. I'm trying to mitigate my Spurs exposure. Like a ton of these guys are popping. Even Champagny at 3.9 is popping just because they're down a body and there are minutes to go around. So don't think I want all of Castle, Vassell, and Champagny in the same lineup. So maybe a max 3 would be okay for San Antonio just because the value's there and they're cheap beyond Wembanyama. So I think it's okay. Suggs, Brogdon, Poole, Grady Dick, a little bit interested at 5.5 without RJ Barrett, but the usage with Quickly is going to come down. So I'm not sure he's an amazing play, but I think if you're entering a lot of lineups, he can be in your pool.
Yeah. I don't think I'm going to go Grady Dick. I feel Quickly can offset the matchup because he's going to have more usage than Dick. He does more things than Grady Dick needs to score 20 real points to hit, even at 5.5K. He just has to. He doesn't really do enough else. And with the bad matchup, I mean, the price is good on Grady Dick, but I don't think I will go there just because I hate playing guys against Orlando, and I think I prefer Quickly there. But yeah, Trey Murphy looks amazing. I'll double down on that again. 7.3K, just way too cheap for the role. You wouldn't think it. Like, oh, I need to play Trey Murphy today. Well, guess what? He's been shooting like 20 plus times a game lately. He had the 3 games with 24 shot attempts. So no Zion, no Ingram. He is a key part of their offense. and Wizards matchup, it's just a really good spot. So he's a borderline core play for me with his current projection and the matchup and the price. I like it quite a bit. Working our way down here a little bit. I mean, you can go flirt with these Mavs guys like Klay Thompson, Quentin Grimes. I don't want to personally. I think the prices are a little bit too high, especially with Kyrie in, because I think they all were priced up from when Kyrie was also out. So not super interested there. Dylan Brooks at 5.4K. Price is coming up a little bit, but he does play big minutes, and the Rockets are down possibly 2 key bodies tonight. Amen Thompson is out, and Tari Eason is questionable, I believe. So even if Eason isn't out, I think 5.4K, the matchup with Celtics is not great, but I think the role is there. I think he's viable as a mid-range guy, right in that Grady Dick mid-range. Another guy that's interesting is Christian Brown at 5K flat, just getting really big minutes. And Malik Beasley at 5.5K with no Jaden Ivey. RIP. Poor guy broke his leg. But Malik Beasley is a pretty good bet to soak up a good amount of usage. And he's an interesting leverage play on what could be a chalky Cade.
Yeah, I'm not super interested in that. I think Tobias at 8% is going to be more appealing, but yeah, he's viable.
All right. Any other values at shooting guard that you're liking?
No.
I'm just trying to do a quick scan here. Like Lou Dort or 4.2K, that's okay. Kason Wallace, he was not that great yesterday, but he's still getting minutes and usage. 3.8K, not the worst dive in the world, especially in a reality where we were looking at Stephon Castle and feeling good at 3.4K. Obviously, I'd prefer Dort between the two. I like the Champagne call. The Spurs thing is just going to be kind of tough. Like, you definitely don't want to load up on too many Spurs here. Like, Keldon Johnson's another guy we'll get to at 4K. So, like, not all these guys are going to deliver. So it could be dicey for sure. All right, I think that does it for the most part. Wait, I will say, what's his price? Corey Kispert at 4.7K against the Pels. I don't hate it with no Koulibaly. He could get a little extra run, a little bit more usage with him out. It's not the worst thing in the world. Not a priority, but he's cheap, and potentially if Bub ends up getting a lot of ownership, that could be an interesting pivot. But I do like Bub. All right, okay, over at small forward, Jason Tatum obviously looks really good. If the Celtics are again going to be without Jaylen Brown, Al Horford is also out, and Porzingis is questionable right along with Jaylen Brown. So if any of those guys are out, Tatum once again looks great. He smashed last night. He was the guy. He had 64 fantasy points. He was better than Giannis, and he was better than LeBron. So, of course, he was the guy that we probably would have wanted to have in a lot of our lineups. Matchup with the Rockets on the road is not ideal, but the projection is good. Price is pretty good, and he could have monster usage. So why don't we start there? Are you interested in Tatum tonight?
Certainly more so if Brown is out or Porzingis is out, but as things stand with both projected in, he's like a secondary play. Just the matchup's really bad. They're on a back-to-back. They had to travel. Not my favorite play, but I think he's okay if the guys are out again.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're not going to play Tatum, you can obviously look to Jaylen Brown if he's in. There's Scotty Barnes at 9.8K. I don't want anything to do with these guys, though. I just think you can drop down to Devin Vassell at 6.2. There's Trey Murphy, also eligible here at small forward at 7.3. Those guys are the priorities for me. I don't really see anybody else, even in the mid-range, that looks really, really good. You have Azar Thompson. He's the first one that stands out at 4K flat. He looks really good with no Jaden Ivey. He looks like a core play at this point. I did mention Christian Brown. Christian Brown just plays a ton of minutes. I just like guys who play minutes and who can do a lot of different things. If he can hit his shots at 5K, he can get there pretty easily. Herbert Jones is another interesting value. Big minutes for him against the Wizards. Don't really think he has to be a leverage play on any of the Pels ownership. He just is a cheap piece to get exposure to that side of the game. KCP is not a guy I really want to play, but the matchup with the Raptors is good, and he's actually been getting a lot of usage and popping off quite a bit lately. What did he do last game? It was crazy. So 21 real points, 33 fantasy points. He's just, maybe that hasn't popped off that much. There's 4 games where he had 24 real points too, but not a fun play by any means. But good matchup, and he does get a little extra usage. But yeah, I think Azar Thompson is probably the main guy here that I'd be looking at. This looks like if I'm playing Trey Murphy as shooting guard, I would look at Azar Thompson here at small forward.
Yeah, no Ivy should see tons of minutes. No Fontecchio either. He hasn't tons of minutes relatively. Like he hasn't played more than 26 all season. So 28 seems a bit lofty, but even 22 to 26 minutes at 4K flat for a good per minute guy is way too cheap. So matchup's also fantastic. I think he's a core play, one of the most obvious plays on the slate. Happy to play him a ton, especially if he starts. He's going to look really good. Cam Whitmore looks like he's going to be kind of popular without Tari Eason and Amin Thompson. I think that's fine just because he's a good per minute guy and he's under 4K. The thing is, the matchup's brutal against Boston, and he's pretty score independent. So if he's not hitting the shots, he's really not going to get there for you. And if he's owned, like it looks like he will be, I think I would just prefer to pivot to someone like Champagny, Julian Champagny, to be clear, from San Antonio. Dean Wade, even at 3.9, at exact same price, same position. I think he's an okay pivot that's not going to be owned at all if Whitmore's popular. And I think Herb Jones, not a guy I play very often, but again, it's a Pelican against the Wizards. 5.3 is a pretty good salary for him, plays a ton of minutes. I think that's a good play. And then Keldon Johnson, like you alluded to, just no Sohan, minutes should be somewhat secure, good usage guy. Also dependent on his shots falling, which is not a guarantee, but 4K flat's just really cheap for Keldon Johnson.
Yeah, I'm pretty okay with eating the Cam Whitmore chalk. There's no Amen, and Easton's actually doubtful. I thought he's questionable. So it's just like he's probably locked into 20, 25 minutes here. I think that's enough to get me interested at 3.9K. If he's like crazy owned, like 60%, okay, we can go a little underweight, but he looks really good. I don't have a problem with doing that whatsoever, especially since there still is, at worst, the ownership is going to be split between some of these guys and the Spurs value. So we'll see what else opens up. But right now, Whitmore looks pretty good. I don't have a problem with it. And I mentioned before, Dylan Brooks, if the game stays close, Dylan Brooks is going to play like 40 minutes. So Dylan Brooks is a little bit more expensive, certainly a little more expensive than you want to pay for Dylan Brooks, but actually he's been doing pretty well offensively. So I don't hate it, especially if he's not owned and Whitmore is owned. That could be interesting too. Small forward is kind of a wasteland, to be honest. Unless you're paying all the way up for Tatum and Trey Murphy and guys, like it's not very good. This looks like a really good spot to take advantage of value, and I think Azar is the way to go for sure. All right, so over power forward, you can use Tatum there as well. There's Jalen Williams at 8.3K. His price is coming down. Projection stays good. He looks awesome. I'd very much rather play him over Tatum on this slate. Miles Bridges, if LaMelo's back, I'm not super into 7.7K Miles Bridges with Brandon Miller also there. The price isn't horrendous, and the Pistons are a good matchup, but I don't think I want to do that. Nobody else is really popping here. PJ Washington at 6.8K. I guess he's okay with Luka still out, but I don't think that's a must at all against the Cavs. And then all these other mid-range guys, the first one that I would see is Herbert. Then you have Azar again, and then Whitmore. So a lot of the same guys. I think the only guy that really stands out that we haven't already touched on would be Jalen Williams. He looks like a really good play at that price.
Yeah, I think Bridges is a comparable play for a little bit less. Charlotte has injuries. If LaMelo and or Williams are out, he's going to get a lot of ownership and become closer to a priority. But you also kind of have to worry about that team just getting nuked if those guys are out. So
yeah,
it's a lot to pay for him, but I think he's an okay kind of tournament dart throw, even if those guys are in at low ownership. The only guy we haven't named, I guess there are two cheap guys, two old veterans who are not very good, but they have decent roles. Tobias Harris and Harrison Barnes. 3.6 for Harrison Barnes is just
awfully Harry cheap. Barnes.
He's cheap. He's not going to get owned. These other Spurs are. If you want to pivot some of that ownership from like Keldon to Barnes, I think that's okay. And then Tobias 4.9, like it was kind of sketchy playing him when he was in the 6K range with Ivy in and all that, and now he's 4.9 with no Ivy and no Fontecchio against Charlotte. I think this, if you're going to play Tobias Harris, this is probably the time you do it.
Yeah, I mean he is cheap, so I'm okay with it with no Ivy. It's not a bad idea at all. Well, it can be a bad idea. So the Miles thing is, if LaMelo is out, yes, Miles Bridges is a totally fine play at 7.6K. He's been crushing. He's got like 3 games over 45 fantasy points in his last 5 games. So obviously, if that role is super, super expanded, I'm okay with that. Matchup is good. The price is fine. Projection solid. If LaMelo is in, I just am less inclined to pay that. I would just rather pay $600 more for Jalen or just do something else entirely. That's just probably where I'm at. But I mean, everything does look good for him. No doubt about it. I'm not refuting that at all. Yeah, Harry Barnes at 3.6K. It's really tough to know what Spurs guy is actually going to get all the burn because they've just been like splitting a lot of those minutes. So yes, some usage and minutes are going to go out to these other dudes with no Sohan there, but who? like which guy can we actually trust? I do like the idea of 3.6K Harry Barnes starting and maybe getting a little bit more usage in the starting lineup. That is interesting for sure. Like what is your stance there? Like right now, ownership aside, like are you feeling better about him at 3.6 or do you feel better about like Keldon Johnson off the bench at 4K?
Well, I feel better about Keldon just because he's a better per minute producer. Like I'm worried that Harrison Barnes can get one rebound and do nothing else. So
it's very true.
It's just an ownership thing though. Like if you're playing a pretty chalky build and you have Keldon Johnson or Champagny or someone like that and just needs some way to get different, I don't think Harrison Barnes is like way different than those two guys in terms of his range of outcomes. So just kind of play the ownership game and say, well, I'm going to take this guy who's comparably projected with way less ownership at a similar salary. Like that's just a pretty easy straight line pivot to make.
Yep. All right, let's move over to center.
It's impossible to know what the Spurs are going to do. Like you said, they have a lot of bodies still, even without Sohan. They're kind of interchangeable. There's no telling what could happen. That's why you have to mitigate your exposure. You're not going to play like 5 of them together.
It could just also be like a last piece in kind of thing too. Like, oh, I want some exposure to the Spurs Nuggets game, and or I just need somebody who's viable, who's cheap, and I only have 4K. Then okay, play Keldon. Well, I only have 3.6K. All right, well, Harry Barnes. You know, like that's pretty easy too. But like you said, if it comes down to you just have 4K left and you're not sure about which one, the ownership way is usually a pretty good way to do it. Because if the night's going to be capped and you have with the Spurs game and you have one guy left, wouldn't you rather have a comparable play that is way less owned? Like obviously, right? So it's kind of like yesterday when you're talking about Max Christie. It's like, okay, Max Christie. And Max Christie careers.
Except me.
I did not play him. I played Jackson Hayes, who he did not play very much because the Blazers benched Ayton, who was awful. Awful. All right, moving on to center. Speaking of which, Nikola Jokic and Wemby top the slate with 68 and 60 fantasy point projections. Obviously, Jokic. I think if you're going to pay 11.5K for Wemby, you might as well just go up and pay for Jokic. I think that's why it's a Jokic slate if I'm spending all the way up. I don't really envision this slate ending with both of these guys not delivering. I think one of them is definitely going to nuke. Very possibly we have a war between these two dudes and they both crush. I don't think I want to pay all the way up for both of them, but I just think if I'm going to pay all the way up, it's going to be Jokic. That said, you know, there is Cat there at 10.4K. The matchup with the OKC is not fun, but he does have an immense ceiling. It easily is within the range of outcomes for Wemby and Jokic to be just okay and Cat to match them, and you save a ton of cash in the process. That being said, Jokic is still the play there. But the guy that makes me feel pretty comfortable with the idea of fading these top two studs is Goga. Goga has an awesome projection, only 7.2K. He looks really, really good. Looks like a better play than Şengün, who is like 2K more expensive, and they have the same projection. So he looks good. And then you have Mark Williams at 5.5K. So he looks really, really good too. He smashed in his last game, facing the Pistons, projects really well. Honestly, a lot of good mid-range guys down here. And then if Porzingis is out, you got the Celtics punts at center too. So lots to like. I do feel inclined to pay for Jokic because it's really tough to not end the night with hammer Jokic with the best projection of the slate, right? What's his ownership at too? 22%. So like he's gonna be kind of a little bit owned. It feels like gross to go into the end of the slate without Jokic at that ownership.
Yeah, he's averaging like 1.97 points per minute without Aaron Gordon. It's pretty insane.
Right.
And obviously, you know, he's going to play 39-ish minutes probably in a close game. So hard to go away from that. But center is pretty loaded. Like there's opportunity cost. Like if Jokic gets 50, you're fucked because he's going to get surpassed by, you know, several other guys probably, especially on a point per dollar basis. It's a lot to spend. So I think he and Wemby are both great, obviously. Much prefer Jokic. That's who I'm kind of leaning into at the moment. But like you said, the cheaper guys, Goga looks great. He's been amazing without Banchero and the Wagners. Toronto's not a very imposing rim defense either. and the minutes are pretty safe. I think the sticker shock of his 7.2K salary might leave his ownership a little bit low, and I'm happy to be over the field on that. Mark Williams and Joe Val, two super cheap centers who are elite per minute. Mark Williams he's averaging 1.47 points per minute on the season. Like, he's just been incredible. The only issue is his minutes have been limited. He got to 31 last time in an overtime game, so mid-20s, even at 5'5", should be enough for him to get there, I would think. Joe Val,
Yep.
Similar story, 20-ish minutes off the bench, but they're playing New Orleans, a team that does not protect the rim at all. On the flip side, I think Yves Missi is a comparable play. Not going to be very popular either, I wouldn't think. And then Hartenstein, revenge game against the Knicks, 7,300, more of a high floor than a high ceiling play, but I feel pretty comfortable with him pretty much every time he's in the lineup.
Yeah, so all good calls. The logic against Goga would be Hartenstein, in my opinion, because Hartenstein's obviously way safer. Like, Hartenstein does this every game. Like, he gets you 35 to 40 fantasy points almost every game. So I really like Goga, but the more I look at Hartenstein, especially with the revenge factor, he does look pretty interesting. You even have Jakob Poeltl at 7K flat. He's cheaper than those two guys. I feel like his projection's a little bit light. Obviously, facing Orlando is not ideal, but he looks pretty decent. I don't hate that at all. Porzingis, if he's even in kind of capped minutes, around 30 minutes, I think he'd be okay against the Rockets. So he would be an okay pivot off of Goga. J-Val, is he going to start? If he starts, then sure, at 5.1K. If he randomly doesn't start, then that would be suboptimal for sure. Don't want to play benched. Has he been starting?
Who?
J-Val.
No, he hasn't been starting. But
okay, well, he could start against a bigger front here with Misi, but I guess we'll have to see. If he doesn't start, I don't think I can do it at 5.1. If he does start, obviously he looks like really good.
Like, he has ceiling off the bench, and it's a revenge game also. It's mainly a match thing. Like, the Pelicans, it's Yves Missi and no one else. They have zero size. So I think he's going to feast in 20 minutes when he's on the floor. There's potential he could start too, which would drive his ownership up, but I think he's a good play either way.
Yeah, I think just in that price range as things stand, I think Mark Williams is the easier call for me. Just and we'll get into it right now. Now that we got through everybody, let's end with our flag plant and strategy for the night. It's like, what do we do here? Are we going like it all comes down to Jokic for me. Am I going to play Jokic? And if I'm not, I think there's a lot of value at center, like in the mid range and even down lower, where it makes fading Jokic a little bit more comfortable. And then you just get a better looking lineup. There's a lot to like in the mid range. And then if you go in with like Cade being your most expensive stud, like I think you can get away with that. I just don't know if I really want to risk it with Jokic pulling ownership. Like Jokic at like 30%, coming in and getting 90, like that's it. You're not cashing if that happens,
I mean, it depends on value. Like, Jokic is 2,300 more than Cade. So the people that play Jokic have to have those cheap guys they're relying on come through. If you're playing Cade, you're having a more balanced lineup. In theory, those are safer plays. So I think there's a path for both. I think both are perfectly viable.
Mm-hmm.
And even like Tatum, like if it's just him with no Brown and Porzingis again, like Tatum as your anchor spend is okay, even in a bad matchup. So as of now, I would say Jokic and Cade, like most of my lineups have at least one of them, but it's not a must. I would just probably prefer to build that way personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think anytime this kind of slate presents itself, I try to look at all sides and try to like, what's the most logical way to do it? What is the field doing? And then, make my decision. Right now, as things stand, I do think I'm going to play Jokic. It just is going to depend on do enough things open up, to where I do have the value where I'm not stretching mega thing. I don't want a whole roster full of 3.4 to 4.5 guys, in my lineup, but he's pretty expensive now, 12.2K. But that is probably where I'm at. So we're talking about flag plant. Like, what's your number one play that for sure you're going to build around?
I guess it would be Trey Murphy. Like, he's going to be popular, but not like on the same level as Castle or Asar Thompson. So flag planting the mega chalk is not really taking a stand. Trey Murphy looks like someone I'm going to have almost certainly, unless news breaks that we don't expect that shakes things up. But as of now, as of 12:39 p.m. Pacific time, Trey Murphy looks great. Goga looks great. I could also fly plan him as someone that's not going to be quite as popular.
Yeah, I think my flag plan is kind of the chalky vein, just because this Wizards Pels game is just, I think, where it's going to be at. I think the thing to do would be target guys that maybe are going to be a little bit overlooked in that game. That you already touched. You mentioned Bob. I mentioned Herbert Jones. I think those guys could be good ways to do that. Maybe Malcolm Brogdon, who you also mentioned, and then obviously hit the chalkier guys too, just because they look really, really good. CJ McCollum and Trey Murphy. Trey Murphy is the play for me in that game, like I think you've said as well. And then I do think this: if Jokic's ownership balloons to the point where he's like pushing 30 or more, then Wemby does start looking a lot more appealing, because Wemby is pretty comparable. Wemby does have quite a ceiling. He had like 83 fantasy points on Christmas Day. So he can certainly match or exceed Jokic, saves you a little bit of money. And right now he's pulling only 9% ownership. So if that goes down and Jokic goes up, Wemby does start to look pretty interesting. But as things stand, I think it is a Jokic night.
Agreed.
All right, that is agreed. All right, that is going to do it for us. Hopefully this helps you out. If it does, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you get alerted to future videos just like this. Thanks for watching and good luck.